Los Angeles Clippers vs Dallas Mavericks. Who's going to win this series? Let's get into this. With the NBA regular season finally coming to a close, now we move on to the NBA playoffs. And in this series we have a matchup between the Los Angeles Clippers and the Dallas Mavericks. So let's get into who I think is going to win this series and why. So of course last season in the NBA bubble, these two exact teams played in the first round of the playoffs as well. And it was an extremely good series and a way better series than a lot of people expected. A lot of people expected the Clippers to cruise past the Dallas Mavericks and potentially win an NBA championship that season. But not only did the Clippers have a tough time with the Mavericks, they also didn't even win the NBA championship. They didn't get by the Denver Nuggets. And when these two teams played last season, they created a little bit of a rivalry between the two, and I'm very excited to watch this season's series between these two teams. Last year when these two teams played in the playoffs, Kristaps Porzingis got hurt in the very first game, so he wasn't even available in that series, and the Dallas Mavericks still made it somewhat of a close series. And this season, the Mavericks will have Kristaps Porzingis unless he gets hurt again in the playoffs, but so far right now they will have him, so I think they'll be a little bit more challenging than they were last season for the Clippers. So let's start out with the Dallas Mavericks and talk about their strengths and weaknesses going into this playoff series. So first, obviously the Dallas Mavericks have Luka Doncic, one of the best players in the league, and Kristaps Porzingis, who's a pretty good player as well. So those two solely are basically the biggest reason why the Dallas Mavericks are one of the best offensive teams in the NBA this season. When you watch Dallas Mavericks games, you see their offense is so free-flowing. They have the ball in Luka's hands, and he easily gives up the ball to his teammates and get open shots for his teammates. The offense is so free-flowing, and it's very difficult for defenses to guard that, especially when you have to pay attention to Luka Doncic, obviously, and Kristaps Porzingis, and they also have shooters all around them, so it's very difficult to guard this team. Well, they don't have Seth Curry anymore, which I think is a little bit of a mistake because Luka passing out to Seth Curry for open threes was one of the best things they had going for them. But they still do have players on their team that could hit a wide open three, and when you're playing with Luka Doncic, you're going to get those wide open threes. And also the Dallas Mavericks run the pick and roll with Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis and pick and pop very effectively because Kristaps Porzingis could shoot from three and very deep from three as well, I should mention. So that makes it impossible to guard the pick and roll with the two because either Luka Doncic is going to score pretty easily or Kristaps Porzingis is going to be wide open for either a dunk or a wide open three. So it's very difficult to guard those two in the pick and roll and pick and pop. Offensively, this team is basically unstoppable, and even the best defensive teams would definitely struggle guarding these guys. And the main reason is obviously Luka, as I mentioned, because when you have a guy who could score as prolifically as Luka can, but also is a very willing and very able passer out there, that makes it impossible to guard him and his team in general. So that's one of the biggest reasons why I think this Dallas Mavericks team is so good on the offensive end. Now another factor when you're talking about playoffs is experience, and obviously Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis don't have much playoff experience. They only have last season, and other players on their team have a little more, but the two main guys don't really have that much playoff experience. But I don't think that's going to affect them that much because last season in their first playoff appearance, at least for Luka Doncic, because Porzingis was hurt, but at least for Luka Doncic, he didn't look scared out there whatsoever. He played extremely well, and basically the way he was playing during the regular season, maybe even a little bit better. So in terms of experience, I don't think that's really a big deal for these guys. But one part of this team's game that I think is really going to affect them in this playoff series and could potentially lose them the playoff series is their defensive ability. Earlier on in the season, the Dallas Mavericks really struggled tremendously on the defensive end, and as the season went on, they definitely improved it, but either way, they still have a little bit of a struggle on that defensive end. And now when you're talking about playing a team like the Los Angeles Clippers with guys like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and scorers all around them, they also have Luke Kennard, they have some really good scorers on this team, and when you struggle on that defensive end, I think it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for the Dallas Mavericks. And if there's one thing that I think separates this team mostly, obviously they have different players on the team, and I think the Clippers are a little more talented, but when it's all said and done and there's one thing you look at to the reason why the Clippers won or the Dallas Mavericks won, I think it would really be the fact that the Dallas Mavericks struggle on the defensive end and the Clippers were just too much for them. So I think going into this playoff series, the Dallas Mavericks really need to figure out their defensive issues, and if they are able to figure that out, I think on the offensive end they're way more prolific and they could potentially be able to win this series, but it all depends on that defensive matchup. But now let's move on to the Los Angeles Clippers. So on the offensive end, as I touched on before, they have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, who are absolute superstars in this league. So when you have those two guys, your offense is automatically going to be very good. So obviously they have a very good offense, and they also have other players like Rondo who can really settle the team down and run the offense pretty effectively in the clutch especially, and in the playoffs especially. And that was a pickup they just got mid-season, so I think that's going to be a huge pickup for them. And one of the reasons why they struggled last season in the playoffs is because they didn't have a real true point guard. So the fact fact that they got one and a guy like Rajon Rondo, who's known for being amazing in the playoffs, I think that's going to help them tremendously. And besides the main two guys of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they also have scorers around them, like Luke Kennard, who I think is a very underrated player in this league and can score buckets, either off the bench or even starting as well. And of course, when you have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, you're going to ISO a decent amount of the time, but I think now the fact that they picked up Rondo, especially in the late game situations, they're going to run the offense a little more effective, with Rondo handling the ball at that point guard and getting other players wide open shots as well. So I think their offense is going to be even more effective this season than it was last season due to the fact that they have Rondo now. So overall, similar to the Dallas Mavericks, the Los Angeles Clippers have a very prolific offense going for them. Now moving on to experience and playoff experience, obviously both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George have excessive playoff experience. They have a ton of experience in the playoffs, and especially for a guy like Kawhi Leonard who's won multiple NBA championships, he really knows what it takes to get that done. So in terms of experience, they definitely have the Dallas Mavericks by far. But as I touched on before, I don't necessarily think that playoff experience affects the Dallas Mavericks that much, and I don't think this would be a huge advantage for the Clippers either. But I think either way, it's definitely worth mentioning. But getting onto the defensive ability of the Los Angeles Clippers, unsimilar to the Dallas Mavericks, the Clippers thrive on the defensive end, and they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. As I said before, even the best defensive teams are going to struggle with this Dallas Mavericks offense, and I agree, I think that is true. But either way, when you consider that the Clippers are so good on the defensive end, I think that's definitely going to make a huge difference in this series, to at least slow down the Dallas Mavericks at least a little bit. And if on the Clippers end, you're slowing down the Mavericks at least a little bit, and on your end, on your offensive end, the Dallas Mavericks can't really defend you whatsoever, and you're scoring at will, I think that's a huge difference. But now moving on to who I think is going to win this playoff series, I think I made it kind of clear, but I think the Los Angeles Clippers are going to win this playoff series. I do think it's going to be pretty close between the two teams, because when you talk about that Dallas Mavericks offense, it's so prolific, it's still going to be pretty difficult for the Clippers to stop, and I don't necessarily think they're going to be able to stop them. They're just going to be able to slow them down. But when you talk about on the other end, where the Dallas Mavericks, I don't think will be able to slow down the Clippers, I think that would be the difference. My prediction for this series is I think it's going to be Clippers in 6 games, just due to all the things that I laid out previously in this video. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Clippers are going to win this series in 6 games, or do you think the Clippers are going to win in a different amount of games, or do you think the Dallas Mavericks are going to win this series? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.